Welcome to Fireside Nets with Spen and Nick, brought to you by Empire Sports Media. It is Monday, August 8th. You're probably listening either right now or the next day, Tuesday, when our podcasts go live on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. But
what about Pandora?
I don't think we're on Pandora.
Hey, did you scratch your nose?
No, I didn't. I don't know where I got that. I think it's a mosquito bite. We're burying the lead. This is an emergency podcast that happened to fall on the day that we record. And the name of this episode is the Brooklyn Ultimatum. It's a play on the Bourne Ultimatum because that's what Kevin Durant has given Joe Tsai and the Brooklyn Nets. So last week, never saw any of the Bourne movies. Last week, it was confirmed that Kevin Durant and Joe Tsai were going to meet. Nets fans were hopeful, thinking maybe they can air out their differences. They can smooth things over. Shams Charania has reported today that was not the case. Kevin Durant not only doubled down on his trade request, he's now basically said, it's either me or it's Sean Marks and Steve Nash. But as long as Steve Nash is the head coach of this Nets team and as long as Sean Marks is calling the shots as the general manager, Kevin Durant informed Joe Tsai that he does not intend to play, which is basically what I've implied and gathered from everything. So we're now at this point where Nets Twitter is pretty divided right now. A lot of people think that Tsai should bend the knee and he should fire Sean Marks and Steve Nash, who, let's face it, I think both have been underwhelming. Nash a little bit more than Marks. But it's not like Marks has really hit it out of the park with these rosters since bringing on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. You can look at the James Harden trade and say that was a mistake. You can look at the signings of, I don't know, it depends. Anywhere from DeAndre Bembry to the trade for Javon Carter to bringing back LaMarcus Aldridge for multiple stints. I don't think you can call the trade for Ben Simmons and Andre Drummond and Seth Curry. I don't think you can call that trade a mistake because Marks had to make a move, but he's been far from perfect. And now we're at a point where whatever the Nets have been doing the last 2.5 years, Kevin Durant is not about it. And he's basically made known to Joe Tsai, if you want me on this team, you got to get ready your coaching staff. So as I said earlier, Nets Twitter's divided. You have a lot of people who think that Tsai should make this move and he should let go of Steve Nash and Sean Marks. And then you have the other half of people who say, hold up. Kevin Durant has been, on the same page with this organization for almost every single move they've made, from trading to James Harden to hiring Steve Nash. I know hiring Steve Nash was not KD's decision. It was a Sean Marks decision that KD and Kyrie approved. So a lot of people are thinking, hey, well, if Kevin Durant has been involved with these decisions, and this is kind of the team that he created, why should Joe Tsai bend the knee and fire these guys? They've done nothing wrong. Kevin Durant wasn't able to win with what he asked of Joe Tsai, of Sean Marks, and of Steve Nash. So it just, I don't think it's very black and white. I think this is an extremely gray area. It's not as easy as saying, well, let's fire our whole front office. And it's not as easy as saying, well, we got to keep them, so let's trade Kevin Durant. Because we've obviously seen that is a lot harder. It's a lot harder to do when all is said and done to try to get some type of package back for Kevin Durant that makes sense for both sides, right? Because what the Nets were asking for, no team's going for. So I'll start with this, Nick. Give me your reaction when you heard this news, and then follow that up with what you think Joe Tsai should do right now.
I think everybody was shocked just reading that. Kevin Durant giving an ultimatum, demanding a trade out of nowhere, and then demanding an ultimatum if he is to stay. I was not surprised about Steve Nash. I was surprised about him wanting to get rid of Sean Marks, because from him signing that extension, $198 million, to him joining the Nets, extensive meetings and discussions with Sean Marks about the future of this organization that he seemed to be, once upon a time, very excited about. I'm not surprised about Steve Nash. Anybody with fucking eyes can tell Steve Nash wasn't a great basketball coach. Listen, with that said, he is a very raw, new basketball coach. He was an NBA player, clearly with a high IQ. Does that always translate to being a coach, a leader, a strategist when it comes to basketball? No. We all love Steve Nash as a person and a player. And right now, nobody loves him as a coach. Why? Because there are obvious gaps, both offensive, defensively, discipline-wise, whenever you watch this Nets organization, that you wonder, where's the lack of communication? So I wasn't surprised about Steve Nash. I don't personally have a lot of faith in Steve Nash bringing a team to deep in the playoffs, let alone even thinking about a freaking championship. But I am surprised, like I said, about Sean Marks, because he has seemed to be a Marks supporter. They have seemed to try to build this franchise together. And you know what's funny? Like you mentioned, all the mistakes Marks has made, very, very critical errors that I think we can all address. The Nets fans, for the most part, still support Marks from what I've heard and from what I see. People still have somewhat of a belief in Sean Marks and what he's trying to build. Maybe it's a second chance. Maybe it's he's made mistakes in the past that we think he's learned from. But a lot of people I speak to in the Nets community are okay with Sean Marks. Steve Nash is a different story. To answer your second question, what should Joe Tsai do? I would get rid of Nash. I've always thought we should get rid of Nash. That to me seemed like a no-brainer. There were, like I said before, gaps, both offensively and defensively. Our defense sometimes was running around like chickens without heads. We looked like we had no idea how to play help defense. And somewhat is on the player, but it gets to a certain point where you're like, how is the other team scoring at will? These are all NBA athletes. If coached, if pushed, if willed in the right direction, they should be able to play decent, if not, somewhat manageable defense that doesn't look like they're Swiss cheese. Offensively, too, in crunch time, we noticed a lot of errors down the line. It was just only ISO ball. It was Durant on his last leg, chucking it up, sometimes keeping us in the game, but really no strategy behind that. Our inbound game always seemed like it was weirdly off as well. Inbounds, like when I was in high school, our inbound game was off. Nobody knew where to throw it in. This is the NBA. Joe Harris or whoever's inbounding shouldn't be falling over the line and turning the ball over right away. So that's just a few things that Steve Nash did wrong, only emphasizing my point that I want him out. I don't know about Steve Marks. I guess if you said to me, clean slate, administration.
I think his name is Sean Marks.
Steve Marks said Steve Nash. Sean Marks. Thanks. I think if you said to me clean slate from top to bottom, I would be open to that because whatever we've been doing doesn't seem to be working. So I'm okay with that. Is it worth it just for Kevin Durant to have 2 or 3 more solid years if we really feel Sean Marks has potential and is headed in the right direction? I don't know. But I guess if you put a gun to my head right now, hypothetical gun, figurative gun, I would say I'd rather keep Durant in the immediate because I think he is an undeniable talent, whereas Sean Marks and Steve Nash have yet to prove themselves in their respective positions.
Yeah, I think everything you said about Steve Nash was spot on. I'm not going to get into why he hasn't been a great coach. I think that his supporters are extremely few and far between at this point. As far as Sean Marks goes, I mean, I don't know. I think at the same time, the fact that a lot of assistant coaches have signed elsewhere. Adam Harrington, for one, was let go. Ime Udoka signed by the Celtics. Mike D'Antoni's no longer with the Nets. The list goes on and on of guys that came and went. And I think part of that annoyed KD and Kyrie. I feel like at the end of the day, we go back to that Bucks series, right? You lose in overtime in Game 7 to the eventual NBA champions. If you're the Nets, you had a choice that offseason to make a decision, make a switch with Steve Nash. And basically, and he was under the hot seat, if you remember, not a great first year. A lot of people weren't crazy about his rotations in the playoffs. It seemed like Kevin Durant was just carrying the Nets, and there was really nothing that Nash could do from a strategic standpoint to will them to victory. It was more Kevin Durant. Like what did the Nets do to stop Giannis in that series, right? Like what did they do to stop the Bucks? I just felt like it was a heavyweight fight, and there was, I remember Nash was on the hot seat after that series. So Marks brings him back, and I guess, in KD's eyes, you see everything that played out this last season, and you just decide you're done. You're done with Marks. You're done with Nash. If that's going to be the face of the Nets organization, those two guys, then you're done with it. And there's a lot to unpack here. I think of the power that Kevin Durant has right now as the face of the Brooklyn Nets, as the best player in the organization in the last 20 years outside of Jason Kidd. And it's extremely telling, how he's reacted to everything, starting with the trade request to this meeting with Joe Tsai. This is a player-driven league now. You look at the Lakers and LeBron James. Everything they do centers around LeBron James. The GM doesn't make a decision without talking to LeBron James. They don't hire Darvin Ham without getting LeBron's approval.
You're not comparing Durant to LeBron James in terms of what he does to the organization. Because LeBron actually puts in work. Kevin Durant just complains.
All right, well, that's your opinion, but I would say Kevin Durant also puts in work.
I mean, Kevin Durant puts in work, but people call LeBron, like people say LeBron recruits people to his team. Who did Kevin Durant recruit besides Mike James?
He had to have a call with James Harden before Harden came over. Look, we don't know what happens behind the scenes. All I'm saying is at this stage in the NBA in 2022, the players run the league more than they did 10, 15 years ago. You would never see this type of stuff happen in the early 2000s and in the late 1990s where players on a 4-year deal would just be like, hey, I want to be traded. Trade me. So for all the people who say, Kevin Durant's a baby, just obey your contract, blah, blah, blah. You signed the deal. Why don't you just stick it out? We are not in those times anymore where guys are just expected to play out their contracts. Now that's for one. And we're talking about the LeBron James power dynamic. Kevin Durant believes he should have that power with the Brooklyn Nets. He doesn't sign here if he doesn't think he gets that power. So the fact that there is pushback and there is sort of this, it's either me or them, it was kind of leading up to this based on everything that KD's done in the last few months, how he reacted to the Kyrie Irving situation, how he requested the trade. Now, there's another side of this. I talked about the majority of coaches that were let go. Brandon Scoop B. Robinson, who, if you're on Nets Twitter, you follow Scoop B. Like him, love him, hate him, whatever you think. He has been saying that coaching is a factor in Kevin Durant's request to make a trade. He's been saying this from the get-go. He said he wasn't crazy about the fact that they let Ime Udoka go to the Celtics to be the head coach. He wasn't crazy about the fact that they let go of Adam Harrington. I think it was this offseason, right? I think Harrington was there until maybe this offseason. I don't remember if he was there.
Did they let go, or they're saying they didn't fire them? They're saying they let them go, like they didn't promote them or try to keep them.
I think Harrington might have been fired.
Oh, was he?
So my point is this. Shout out to Scoop B. He's been saying this for a while. And he said, and part of that, is the racial aspect. A lot of these coaches that they've let go have been black, and Steve Nash is white. Sean Marks is white. These are white guys who have failed at their jobs, especially Steve Nash. Sean Marks, it's debatable whether or not you think he's been good or bad. He's definitely been inconsistent. But I reading into Scoop B's reports, A, they're annoyed with the decisions. B, yeah, it's two white guys running the show in Brooklyn, and you factor all these things in, the power dynamic, the fact that KD hasn't agreed with a lot of what Marks and Tsai have done, especially with Steve Nash, and now you are at this point, this pinnacle moment for your franchise, for your organization, where whatever you've done as the owner, it's annoyed the best player in the last 20 years. So now you have this decision to make. Who do you keep? Do you keep the coach? Do you keep the GM? Or do you keep the star player? I've said it from the get-go. In 25 years, are we going to be talking about Kevin Durant, or are we going to be talking about Steve Nash and Sean Marks as one of the greatest coach-GM duos in the history of the game? And yes, I'm being sarcastic here. From a basketball perspective, this is a no-brainer. You keep Kevin Durant. You keep the guy who chose to play for your franchise, who's one of the best scorers of all time. But I don't know if Joe Tsai wants to do that, because everyone talks about how he's been in lockstep, they say, with Sean Marks. Obviously, he's a supporter of Steve Nash. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here after, 2 disappointing years as the head coach. But there's going to be a lot discussed over these next few days. Nets Daily posted an article, and they were writing about it. And basically, they've been told that the Nets intend to be hardline on Durant, suggesting they will not give in to his latest demand. In fact, it would seem that KD, knowing this, wants to reinvigorate trade talks, which have been in a standstill. I don't know. If you're trying to get traded quicker, I don't know if this is the smartest way to go about this, which is why I don't know if I buy that. Like, why would you say, hey, I still want to get traded, but if you fire those guys, I'm still here. Those are two different messages.
I'm still standing stronger than I ever been. You know that song?
Yeah, I don't know that song.
Really? It's Elton John.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you need to like diversify your musical palette.
Yeah, sure. But anyway, back to this. So that's my point. So you have an owner in Joe Tsai who Nets Daily does not think wants to bend the knee. You have an aggravated, annoyed player, star player in Kevin Durant, who's saying, hey, what you guys have done up to this point hasn't worked. He has lost faith. And I'm gonna pull up the original Shams Charania tweet, because if you hear this, messaging, there's no, if Sean Marks and Steve Nash are there at the beginning of the season, Kevin Durant won't play. So Shams Charania wrote, in a meeting with Nets owner Joe Tsai, Kevin Durant reiterated his trade request and informed Tsai that he needs to choose between Durant or the pairing of general manager Sean Marks and Steve Nash. He then tweeted, Kevin Durant informed Joe Tsai that he does not have faith in the Nets' direction. The meeting was described as transparent and professional with a clear message: keep me or the GM and the coach. So this leads me to believe this. If you're Tsai, and yeah, the easy basketball decision, as I've said, is you keep Kevin Durant, you keep Kyrie Irving, you hire a new coach, you hire a new GM, you move on. Let's say Tsai doesn't do that. Let's say Tsai says, you know what, KD, I don't.
Or maybe we hire a coach
think
with experience and not a former player with no experience. Just a thought.
Whatever you do, obviously you make sure Kevin Durant's okay with it. And I'm sure
Frank.
Kevin Durant might have.
Frank.
That'd be great. I'm sure KD might have some ideas on who the Nets can hire, if they really were to do that. But there's a few. So, it's August 8th, right? Like, training camp's right around the corner. The season's a few weeks away. I don't know if the Nets and Joe Tsai pivot this late in the offseason. That's for starters. But what I'm getting at is this. If Tsai tells Kevin Durant, hey, with all due respect, fuck you, we're not going to fire Steve Nash and Sean Marks. They're going to still be here, whether you like it or not. We'll work on trying to trade you, but we're not just going to bend the knee and have two guys lose their jobs because you don't have faith in them. If Joe Tsai does that, and the Nets can't trade Kevin Durant before the season starts, Nick, it is a real possibility that Kevin Durant will sit out as a Brooklyn Net. That is my prediction. That is my thought process. And people saying, oh, he's not wired like that. Enough. Okay. He's said multiple times he's unhappy with where this team is headed. He doesn't like the front
I didn't think he was going to sit out. I didn't think he was going to sit out until this just came out. Now, I don't think he's going to sit out because I think something's going to happen. There is going to be some sort of transition, change, firing, trading, rehiring. They're not going to let this just remain a standstill because Kevin Durant will win the standstill. He has all the power. He is literally the talent and the driving force of your team being any sort of remotely entertaining, competitive, and successful basketball team. The best player before Kevin Durant was Brook Lopez in this organization. So we need Kevin Durant more than we need Sean Marks or Steve Nash. Therefore, something I believe will happen, and we won't just continue going in circles and even putting Kevin Durant in a position to sit out, because I don't even want it to get there. Watching the Nets with Kevin Durant sitting out, not even at the games, would be miserable. That would be depressing, and I don't want to see the ball in the hands of Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving with no one else to pass it to. I mean, listen, I like Seth Curry and Joe Harris and some supporting cast, but that team is not a complete team. I also have a great idea for a segment name. Joe Tsai. The segment's called Joe
Tsai.
That was a good one, right?
I like that segment name. So basically, to wrap this up, because I know we got to finish at 4:30 on the dot. Nick has some unattended matters he needs to get to. There are three things that can come from this, and it's only these three things. The Nets can try to make a trade and get rid of Kevin Durant. And guess what? This announcement, this news being leaked, it makes it harder for the Nets to get back a good haul, because now they're in serious desperation mode. Everything that the Nets have built and structured right now, their best player isn't supporting. So if you're a team that wants Kevin Durant, you're calling Sean Marks and you're being like, hey, while you're still the general manager of the Brooklyn Nets, here's the best I can do. And if you don't like it, good luck. Right? That gives teams more bargaining power. So that's number one. That's the first thing. Number two, the Joe Tsai fires Steve Nash, fires Sean Marks. They rebuild the coaching staff. And basically, you give Kevin Durant the keys to this organization. And you say, you know what? Do what you want over the next however many years you're here. Our entire faith is with you. And then the third thing is you don't do anything. And you wait and you see if Kevin Durant comes off this stance, which at this point, given everything that's transpired this summer, is probably the most dangerous. And that, I'm telling you guys, will lead, not doing anything, will lead to Kevin Durant sitting out games. Everyone when the reports came out that NBA insiders believe Kevin Durant is not wired to sit out, I looked at that report and I said, that's bullshit. What are you guys saying? You're not inside this guy's head. You don't know what he's thinking. If he doesn't have faith in the organization, this isn't a fucking 9-to-5 job where, hey, I don't like my boss, but guess what? I have to come in and fucking work. That's not the NBA. People who compare playing in the NBA to like normal average jobs, it's not the same. I am not the Kevin Durant at my job. I can't just come in and be like, you know what? Fire everybody. The CEO, my manager, everyone, get rid of him. I'm unhappy. That's not how this works. Kevin Durant has the power to do that because of his value to the team, because of his value to revenue with the Brooklyn Nets. Let me ask you a dumb question, Nick. If the Nets trade Kevin Durant and they suck for the next few years, do you think they will sell more tickets or less tickets?
I would say less.
You would say less, and you'd probably be correct in that answer. That's my point. 3 options for Joe Tsai. I hope he makes the right one. Thanks for listening to this episode of Fireside Nets with Spen and Nick, brought to you by Empire Sports Media.
I want to say one thing. This is a free ad. We're not sponsored. This is no way promotion. Everyone, Disney Plus, watch the Giannis Antetokounmpo movie called Rise. Great film. If you love basketball, if you like Giannis, you'll like him even more.
Okay, and watch Thunderstruck, starring Kevin Durant.
No,
he was in the movie.
That's a terrible movie.
What? No, first watch Thunderstruck, then watch
Space Jam Legacy with LeBron.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. Have a great one. We'll talk soon. Fireside Nets